I'll be talking to you tonight about oppression, change, freedom. And freedom is the acceptance of the necessity to change. Now, I have lived by this principle, and the party has lived by this principle, and it has never let us down. It is a principle as true in personal life as it is in political life. That principle is a fundamental law of the universe and of life itself. Life means change. And although it has not been spelt out in a single sentence, it is the single most important theme that runs through all the works of Karl Marx. It is a principle that was tested in the workshop of history by all the great parties of the working class. It was the foundation stone of the Bolshevik Revolution, which again and again accepted the necessity to change, even if it meant a bitter peace with Germany, or an unpalatable, if limited, form of capitalism, as in Lenin's new economic program. And what other principle but that principle is driving and guiding the second great renewal of socialism, which is now going on in the Soviet Union? Freedom is the acceptance of the necessity to change. Now, the world won't change just because you want it to change. And it won't change just because you need it to change. The world only changes when people understand that nothing holds them back except their old ideas, their failure to accept the necessity for change. And they finally agree to strike for freedom when they do accept the necessity to change. A party of the working class is the political instrument of those who both need and want to change the world. And that is a job description of the Workers' Party. And like all job descriptions, it is continually challenged by capitalism. So every day it has to be written out again, negotiated again, fought for again, consolidated again, and every day the party must prove itself all over again, because every day is a different day. And every day the world is changing, and every day it needs to be looked at carefully, studied, because it is not the world as it was yesterday. For 26 years, this party has been in a state of continual change, and in a state of continual calm about that change. And this willingness to change the sacred principles as laid down by our forefathers. Funny thing that we've never seemed to have had any foremothers, I suppose. It's a strange biological fact which probably accounts for a lot of the schizophrenia in our society. But this willingness to change the sacred principles seems to drive Mr. Morris Manning and his friends in the media to a frenzy of fury. Apparently, Mr. Morris Manning thinks the media should dig up some dispute in the Workers' Party because he finds us suspiciously calm in our approach to the contest for president, and whose candidates he finds far too united on ideological matters, as compared with, say, Fine Gael. Which Morris implies is a powerhouse of profound philosophical speculation. Now, don't be nasty and say you thought their only interest was furtive financial speculation. However, 50 years ago, Mr. Manning's party were stamping around in blue shirts and beating up Republicans. Today, They are stamping around in sweatshirts and beating us up in the media because we're not the real Republicans like we used to be. For over 20 years, this party has been accepting the necessity to change, and all of it was done in public at Ardèche after Ardèche. Some people, like Maurice Manning, never noticed. Now suddenly they look at us, they see we look different, and they say we must have done it all in secret because otherwise we should be in a state of shock after killing all those sacred cows which they were used to seeing around the place. The fact that we killed sacred cows at every Ardèche in public over the past 20 years, and that the whole process began with a massively publicised walkout by the provost, has caused some journalists to think that Mr. Manning must have been asleep for the last 20 years, and now he's going around like Rip Van Winkle, unable to understand why everything is not the way it was before. Which, I suppose, is a fair enough description of the politics of any member of Fine Gael. The most sacred principle for a socialist party is the principle of change itself. And any principle apart from that is only sacred until such time as it is won, and then it is replaced by another principle. Let me give you an example of what I mean. The emancipation of women is one of the general aims of this party. But every year women are revising the concrete forms that this general aim should take. 70 years ago, the emancipation of women was largely confined to securing the vote. 25 years ago, the emancipation of women was largely confined to securing equal pay for equal work, not yet really achieved. Today, the emancipation of women is widened to securing freedom from sectarian and sexually oppressive legislation. Tomorrow, when that battle is won, the agenda will again be deliberately confined for tactical reasons to allow the concentration of all our forces on the next step. Who knows what the next step may be? Whatever it may be, it will arise from a desire for some freedom that involves the necessity to change, and the necessity to change society to win that freedom. So there are no sacred principles. Women are not the objects of history. They are the subjects of history. They will write the agenda for the next phase of the struggle. And for the duration of that struggle, that agenda is a sacred principle for so long as the struggle lasts, and no longer, because there are other principles and other struggles looking for a place on the agenda. There are no fixed principles about what is on the agenda because the agenda is always changing. There can only be fixed principles about the need for an agenda. The objectives of this party keep moving, so the party must move in pursuit. Change is the permanent condition of a party of the working class. Changing the world means precisely that. And since the party is part of the world which it is changing, it must change too. A party of the working class which claims to be trying to change the world and is not itself changing with it is not only a contradiction in terms, but is a sick party. If it is not changing, it means it has stopped listening to the working class, which is forced to continually change by changes in the process of production. And it looks to the party of the working class, it looks to us, to replace the erratic and inhuman changes of capitalism with a planned process of production in which change is no longer arbitrary, but anticipated and accepted and humanized, so that humanity is the author of change and not its victim. And that is why I say that freedom is the acceptance of the necessity to change. The Workers' Party is a political party of the working class. And since the party is drawn from the working class, it must change with the class it represents. Any party which says it will never change is not a party of revolution, but a party of reaction. The provisionals are a classic case in point. They have no language except the language of conservatism. Nothing will change. There will be no ceasefire. There will be no truce. There will be no settlement except our settlement. They cannot win the war, and they cannot lose the war. So the war must go on until the British leave Ireland, at which magic moment they pretend that for some reason the million Protestants, whose sons and daughters they have butchered for almost 20 years, will suddenly fall into the arms of Éire Nua or whatever crackpot version of nostalgia they are peddling at that particular time. The provost never listened to people. If they listened, they would hear the people telling them they want peace. But the provosts don't want to hear about peace, any more than Hitler wanted to hear about peace. They cannot cope with peace. They have no ideas about peace. In fact, they are terrified of peace. After 20 wasted years and over 2,000 wasted lives, the provost still won't listen to the people on whose behalf they claim to be waging a war for Irish unity. And the people keep telling them that each day of their murderous sectarian war, Irish unity moves further and further away. For nearly 20 years, they have been killing Irish Protestants to force the British out. But 1 million Protestants in Northern Ireland claim to be British. Irish, but British. And when they live and act as British, they are accused of collaboration and become, in that chilling phrase of the provost, legitimate targets. For the first time since Wolfe Tone and the United Irishmen set out the Republican goal of uniting Catholic, Protestant and dissenter, the Protestant people in this generation have for the first time been openly named and targeted as enemies of the people. What the provosts mean by Brits out is simply prods out, and they proved this weekly in the killing fields of Fermanagh. So after 20 years, do we see the provost poised for power north and south? In the north, the much vaunted political strategy has led to the spectacular coup of Adams being able to talk to John Hume. And in the south, after almost 20 years of exclusive interviews in the most exclusive magazines and Sunday newspapers, the only place they can win a seat is in the back row of questions and answers. The Workers' Party has long since learned that if you want freedom, you must accept the necessity for change. Always throughout the long years of struggle, we kept our eyes on the prize, freedom. Of course, the prize is still before us to be won, but we have forged the weapon to seize that prize. And that weapon is you and I and all of us together in the Workers' Party. As we strengthen and advance and become the ideological battering ram of our class, no Bastille in this country will be safe. And there is no shortage of Bastilles. Bastilles which imprison our class in this society, crippling lives with material poverty and poverty of the mind, where generation after generation are told by the class of power and privilege, thus far and no further, that is your lot, accept it. Where lives become mere existences, and those mere existences become a scramble to survive. Where joy and learning and expression and hope and cultural self-fulfillment and happiness itself are the private property of those who own the wealth and who think they own our lives. The prize is freedom, oppression is the enemy, and our weapon is the people through this party. Many people's concept of oppression is very limited. It is not just the dawn knock of the political police. It is not just the tramp of jackboots or the crack of skulls under batons. It can be subtle, quiet, invisible, so that you can be absolutely persuaded that the oppression itself is part of your freedom, until you recognize that capitalism is oppression, that the system is the jail. Is it not oppression to see the wealth created by workers poured into the pockets of profiteers and speculators? Is it not oppression to have your company or factory closed down so that while you and your family are left in poverty and misery, the Workers' Party has long since learned that if you want freedom, you must accept the necessity for change. Always throughout the long years of struggle, we kept our eyes on the prize, freedom. Of course, the prize is still before us to be won, but we have forged the weapon to seize that prize. And that weapon is you and I and all of us together in the Workers' Party. As we strengthen and advance and become the ideological battering ram of our class, no Bastille in this country will be safe. And there is no shortage of Bastilles. Bastilles which imprison our class in this society, crippling lives with material poverty and poverty of the mind, where generation after generation are told by the class of power and privilege, thus far and no further, that is your lot, accept it. Where lives become mere existences, and those mere existences become a scramble to survive. Where joy and learning and expression and hope and cultural self-fulfillment and happiness itself are the private property of those who own the wealth and who think they own our lives. The prize is freedom, oppression is the enemy, and our weapon is the people through this party. Many people's concept of oppression is very limited. It is not just the dawn knock of the political police. It is not just the tramp of jackboots or the crack of skulls under batons. It can be subtle, quiet, invisible, so that you can be absolutely persuaded that the oppression itself is part of your freedom, until you recognize that capitalism is oppression, that the system is the jail. Is it not oppression to see the wealth created by workers poured into the pockets of profiteers and speculators? Is it not oppression to have your company or factory closed down so that while you and your family are left in poverty and misery, your bosses gain increased wealth by selling off the assets of your company? Is the suffering and waiting and wasting and dying of those languishing in need of public medical care, is that torture and death not oppression? Is the system which slams the door to higher learning in the faces of the children of workers, while the children of the owners of wealth and property pack our universities, is that not vengeful and oppressive? Is it not oppression of both teachers and children to force out or discard hundreds of teachers of our children so that while the brightest and best might get by, thousands of children will be mentally maimed and damaged for life? The thousands of parents who fill the streets on this issue in a surprising display of militancy and anger they see in education a means of escape for their children from the cycle of disadvantage, from the oppression which they themselves experienced. And they know that education can lead them to freedom from oppression. But they don't yet clearly understand that the system of oppression, the capitalist system, is designed to ensure that they don't get that education, that they don't ever be allowed to break free. That is what capitalism, that is what oppression is about. This is a shameful system of economic oppression which finally ships tens of thousands of our young people out of the country like excess garbage. And this, they are told, is the proof of their freedom. They have freedom of movement. They are free to go wherever they like, but not free to live and work at home. There are, of course, other oppressions: social oppression and oppression of the rights of individuals, seen in recent legislation and constitutional amendments. There is the oppression of women who are denied the right to play a full and equal part in the sharpening clash of social forces. There is also denial of human rights and oppressive legislation, north and south. And it is right that I should recall this, if only very briefly, in this 20th anniversary of the Civil Rights Campaign, launched in 1968, and we have here, as our chairman here, a former chairman of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, Paddy Joe McLean. Was a year of considered realism and clarity, following several years of diligent work clearing the ground for what should have been a genuine turning point in Ireland's modern history. And this party, and the spirit which guided this party, was the moving spirit behind the civil rights movement. Its purpose was to remove the oppression of discrimination and bigotry. But just as this oppressive lid about oppression became themselves the cornerstone of the Bastille of oppression itself. So we have a task to complete 20 years later when we lift the sectarian terror off our backs. We want to see workers' rights protected in a Bill of Rights, and we declare that the only fair employment is full employment. Which brings me to my message to the Protestant people of Northern Ireland. My message to them is the same as I have been saying to you here tonight. The Protestant people of Northern Ireland need freedom. They need freedom from terror and fear. To find that freedom, they must accept the necessity to change. And from that will come an even greater freedom, freedom from the past which has betrayed them. The Protestant people of Northern Ireland cannot be given freedom from terror and fear. They must give that freedom to themselves. They must escape from the past which is now betraying them, as Britain will betray them. They must stand on their own feet, and this party is holding out a helping hand. But to gain that freedom, they must accept the necessity to change. And I think by now the Protestant people of Northern Ireland accept that they need change. That is not enough. They must want change. They must rush forward towards change and control it before it crushes them in some cynical deal between the Provos and SDLP or between Fianna Fáil and the Tories. I think by now the Protestant people of Northern Ireland have given up any hope of long-term protection from the British Crown. I say Protestant people rather than unionist or loyalist, because I think that the terms unionist and loyalist and unionism and loyalism are no longer an adequate or accurate description of a proud people who are slowly facing the necessity to forge a new identity that will draw on the deepest wells of their culture. And when I call them the Protestant people of Northern Ireland, I feel sure they will understand that I'm using the phrase in a cultural and historical sense as well as in a religious sense. And I am certain it was not from loyalism or unionism, but from the Protestant and dissenting traditions that they drew the extraordinary fortitude and forbearance they have shown in the teeth of every atrocity and provocation. In short, it is Protestantism and not unionism that produces the moral fibre that marked out Mr. Gordon Wilson of Enniskillen as the kind of Irishman we would all like to be if only we had his courage and conviction. Mr. Wilson could have spoken the bitter word, but Mr. Wilson is a man who understands the limitless capacity of man to change, and so he spoke of reconciliation and peace. And I do not know of any person in this republic here, except a few psychotics, who were not changed in some way by this man's capacity to accept the necessity of the moment and to use it to strike a blow for freedom. The Protestant tradition and its secular and democratic sources will become all the more important as a source of strength as it becomes clear that the British will withdraw when it suits them, and that loyalism and unionism will be as confusing as the term republicanism, which for a long time to come will be stained by its abuse by sectarian killers. And so, as the Protestant people of Northern Ireland see the necessity to go back to their own resources, they could do worse than study the words of the Internationale. No princes from on high deliver us, no trust have we in prince or peer. Our own right hands, the chains must shiver now, chains of hatred, of greed, and of fear. This party wants to talk to the Protestant people of Northern Ireland. Every party in Ireland, from Fianna Fáil to Fine Gael, SDLP, Provisionals, seem to want to talk about them. Every faction in Britain, from Thatcher Tories to Livingston Trotskyites, seems to want to talk around them, behind their back, to talk them into a corner or a cul-de-sac or whatever, as if there were some primitive tribe whose redundant religious rites and curious cultural rituals should be sanitized and studied as if they were exhibits in a museum rather than a living people whose courage and endurance have seen them take the genocidal butchery of 200 small farmers and workers in Fermanagh without retaliation, and who gave an awesome display of tolerance and forgiveness as they knelt amongst their dead after Enniskillen. And what are these primitive Protestant principles? What are these curious cultural rituals? What are these outmoded political aspirations that strike the British and Irish media as placing the Protestant people of Northern Ireland outside the pale of normal, civilised society? The three traits of Northern Protestantism that make them unfit for any understanding by the mass media in Ireland or Britain seem to me to be as follows. First, the principle of private conscience, which is the foundation of Protestantism, and which we in this party believe to be the foundation stone of modern democracy. The principle of private conscience, which says, neither king nor pope is higher than the conscience of the common man and woman, and which principle became the foundation stone of the French Revolution under Robespierre. We in the Workers' Party very much want to see the primacy of private conscience embedded as a permanent part of our political culture, in place of the snivelling, craw-thumping cant and hypocrisy that passes for conscience among the Irish bourgeoisie. We very much need the presence of the Protestant conscience in our country, and we need it now. The second trait is the tradition of rebellion against the dogmatism and authoritarianism of Rome. This arises, of course, from the principle of private conscience and the origin of protest. But the fact that they couch their anti-Romanism in rough and sometimes obsolete language should not blind us to their purpose, which is to defend liberty and personal freedoms. This is why their songs are so much about defending our freedom, religion, and laws. The third tradition of Northern Protestantism is a powerful commitment to industry, to taking on a task and giving it the full attention that the dignity of work demands. This is a tradition of fair trading and honest service and careful craftsmanship, the discipline of shipyard and school and factory and farm and market and mill. This is the engine that drove the Northern Industrial Revolution, a priceless resource, cruelly wasted by the Tories on the one hand and bombed senseless by the Provos on the other. These are three vital traditions that must be cherished if we are ever to reconstruct our country out of its present chaos. I believe that our island desperately needs these traditions. Thatcher and Haughey, Hume and Adams want to talk about the Protestant people of Northern Ireland as if they were a problem. The Workers' Party wants to talk to them because they are, in our view, not the problem, but the solution. Ireland can. They can bring change, they can bring peace, they can bring freedom. And that's what I want to talk to them about now in my last address as President of the Workers' Party. This party would not presume to tell you, the Protestant people of Northern Ireland, what you should do. But it has earned the right to talk to you about what we believe we must all do together in order to create a lasting peace and a lasting prosperity on this island of Ireland. Talk is cheap, but the right to talk comes with a high price, and we have paid that price in Ireland, whose papers are stamped with peace, whose cards show us to be paid up members of that union of hearts and minds, which is our only protection against civil war, whose records of resistance to terrorism and tribalism are written in the blood of our members. So, as you examine our documents, you will be turning the pages of 20 years of history, years of hardship, years of heroism, years of sorrow, years of struggle, years of pity, but years of pride, the best years of our lives. For 20 years now, we have lived in the shadow of civil war. For 20 years, we in the Workers' Party have struggled to prevent the shadow of civil war becoming the substance of civil war. For 20 years now, butchers in balaclavas and sectarian savages tried to terrorize our people into civil war, while we have held open the narrow path of peace so that the people of Ireland, Protestant and Catholic, might pass through to a better land. For 20 years now we have stood against sectarianism, alone, abused, and often abandoned by those whose vision could not see through the long night. For 20 years now we have, like Cuchulainn, tied ourselves to the stone of liberty so that we might not fall or fail our people, and the best and bravest in our party have given their lives to hold that pass of peace. For 20 years we have never left our post. For 20 years we survived and held the path to peace and democracy as Billy Macmillan told us to do. And now we think that you, the Protestant people of Northern Ireland, should move forward into the sunlight, move proudly to the forefront, and lead us through that path to peace. No surrender. Anish tá deireadh ráite agam, tá deireadh mar ré tagtha, agus níl le rá cúpla focail scór. Agus iad na focail scór na cín is deacra I'm siú uirnta. Bháil an buchas a gháil I bhillig, agus le gach báil an pártaí inniu, agus I rinne blianta, as an gár, agus an tacaíocht, agus an díolseacht a haspáin siad dam, agus an nói an muinín a bhí a gcuibh asam comá. Tá súlagam go bhaig an tuachtarán nua, an tacaíocht, an díolseacht, agus an muinín céine óibh, agus galamdíobh go bhaig sé iad. My final words are for you and for all the members of the Workers' Party. I have given whatever I had to give for the party, for the people of Ireland, and for a better world. Others have given much more. Others, comrades, have given their lives. But each one gives what they can, and all work in a spirit of comradeship. That's what wins all struggles, and that's why I must thank each one of you and all members of the party now and over many years for the great help and support and loyalty they have given to me and for their belief in me over the years. I'm sure you will all give the same support, loyalty and comradeship to the new president of the party, whom you will elect tomorrow morning. I pledge mine. I wish to thank the comrades and fraternal delegates from abroad for coming here to our annual conference, many of whom are engaged in struggle far more oppressive regimes. I know other delegates will forgive me if I make a special mention at this time of the bitter and bloody struggle of the Palestinian people and warmly welcome the PLO representative. I have just one thing to say to the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Shamir, and it is an old Yiddish saying, if you haven't got compassion, how can you call yourself a Jew? May I say a special word of thanks to all my comrades, supporters and friends in Dublin West constituency. Their level of work and commitment has been outstanding, but I have no relief to offer them because I intend to be out there in the midst of struggle for a long time to come. Finally, with my last words to you, may I very specially thank the best and most committed worker this party has ever had, whose commitment and work go back more years than even I can remember, who is still urging people on when we are all exhausted. Comrades and friends, I salute Mé McGillen. Come over here. Bring May over here. Have your flowers on there. You have your flowers.